Hey everyone, at this point you're probably really enjoying your school holidays, but as the new year approaches or has passed, you're probably wondering to yourself, how can I make the most of my HSC holidays in preparation for year 12? What should I focus on? How should I study? Now everyone probably has their own studying techniques or strategies that work for them, but here are my 4 R's to making the most of your HSC holidays. Refreshing or rushing, routine, resources, and last but not least, rest. Let's get into it. Now, a lot of the tips that I'll focus on may have some specific mathematic things I'll talk about, but hopefully there are some general tips you can take away for any subject. Firstly, refreshing or rushing. There are 2 kind of trains of thoughts to using your HSC holiday. You can refresh yourself on the content you've already learnt, or you can rush ahead and learn new things that you haven't covered in class yet. I'm going to talk a bit about the pros and cons of both of them. Before that, let me just ask you, have you ever had that feeling where you've walked to an exam, you've sat down, and you've read a question, and you know you've seen that type of question before, but it's ever slightly so different, so much so that you can't actually answer that question anymore, you're stuck. And in that situation, it shows, although you may be familiar with a particular method or process, you haven't learnt it enough so that you can adjust for slight differences in the question. That's why it's really important to refresh yourself on things that you've already learned. And particularly so in subjects like mathematics and sciences, because the content in the preliminary course builds upon the HSC content. In fact, all the content from the preliminary course is actually accessible in the HSC exams, particularly for maths. Here's an example from the 2016 Mathematics 2 unit exam. It's a multiple choice question from the real functions topic. And there's a whole heap of other examples. For example, this extension 1 paper with a circle geometry question, which I love to test now, from the 2015 paper. It's really important that you know your preliminary content through and through. So how can you refresh yourself on the preliminary content? Simple things like going through past homework exercises, or looking through your past assessment tasks or yearly exams and redoing the mistakes that you've done before can really help consolidate the knowledge you've learned previously. Now, if you are confident in the knowledge of the preliminary course, and I guess HSC Term 1, it may be worthwhile rushing ahead and looking at what you're about to learn in future topics. When I was sitting the HSC, I learned from the Extension 1 course a topic called Mathematical Induction. And that was really helpful because when I encountered it again in the classroom, I was a lot more familiar with the topic and I could keep up with the class much more confidently than if I hadn't gone through it. Now, although your teacher will most likely have more engaging or perhaps even different ways of teaching a topic, if you have a familiarity with it, it can be a lot more helpful. But just a word of warning, you need to be careful because learning things independently, although is a good skill, can open up the opportunity to learning things incorrectly. And that can lead to a lot more work later on if you have to relearn or adapt your style to how your teacher has taught it. So even though if you know your preliminary content through and through, it can be worthwhile consolidating that more rather than rushing on ahead to new content that you haven't learned yet. Routine, routine, routine. A typical day for most people looks quite similar. They'll wake up, have breakfast, go to school or work, come home, have dinner, and then go to sleep. And it can be really helpful to adopt a similar mentality to your studies in the holidays. Because you have so much time, it can be hard to allocate time effectively and good time management. A simple thing like this, a little schedule, just has all the days and all the hours, and just assigning things to those time slots can be really helpful in making effective use of your time. Particularly, I found it helpful that studying in the morning is when your mind is most fresh and I guess most absorbent to new knowledge, particularly in that 9 to 11 kind of time slot. That can be really helpful to concentrate your studies and be diligent in waking up for them. If you don't like something like this, which may be a bit restrictive, specifying each hour of each day, there is a technique called the Pomodoro Technique. I'll put a link in the description below. But essentially, it relies on having a simple stopwatch or a timer and allocating a certain number of time to a task, generally about 25 minutes. And all you do is you start a timer for 25 minutes, and for that 25 minutes, you are fully focused on a certain task. And it can be anything. It can be doing your homework, it could be doing some revision, or sitting a part of an assessment task. But what it allows you to do is completely focus on your task, and it has the flexibility of adjusting the time that you spend towards it. And make sure you don't underestimate the power of this routine, because little things can add up to a large bed of knowledge. Just an example, there was a man in India, his name was Jadav Payam, and he, at a very young age, not much older than yourselves, planted a small tree in a desert plain outside of his village. And each day he would plant another tree. And he did this for many days, many months, and many years, 35 in fact. But after those 35 years, they weren't just small trees anymore. Those small trees had turned into a large forest. And that's very similar to how these routines build up our knowledge. Individually and in isolation, these homework tasks, exercises, and exams even can feel like they're not adding up too much. But collectively, they're adding up to that large forest of knowledge in preparation for your HSC exams. Resources are in abundance at school. Your teachers give them to you, perhaps your tutors, or even your friends give them to you. What kind of resources should you be collecting, and how should you be finding them? I think it's really important to be collecting resources because you don't want to be in a rush to collect them just when your exams are around the corner. Here's an example of some of the resources I give my students. They're essentially past HSC questions for certain topics. So for example, here we've got a 2-unit integration, and it's separated by different HSC years here. And this one here is an extension 1 version. It's the topic of geometry and calculus, and it's even got multiple choice and some of the extended or short response questions. And it's really good because it allows you to focus on certain topics. Other things as well, just like your textbooks, Cambridge and Fitzpatrick I've got here. These can be really helpful in gaining a fresh perspective on a topic you may not understand. If you don't have access to these resources, there are plenty of free ones online. Just to name a couple, the NESA multiple online choice quiz, I'll put a link in the description below again, is really helpful. It doesn't have it for all the topics, but it can help you refresh yourself on multiple choice type questions for a whole heap of different subjects. The HSCOnline has a lot of past trial and assessment task papers, and that can be really good to see content that you've learned and practice an exam style revision. Now you may have heard this before, but rest is actually the most important part of this whole process into consolidating all the hard work and study you've put in. Now it's not just important to look at the quantity of rest or sleep that you're getting, but also the quality. Throughout a 6 to 8 hour sleep, if you're having good quality sleep, you'll enter something called rapid eye movement, or REM stage of your sleep. And this stage is crucial for learners because it helps your brain solidify everything that was taken in and learned that day, and it clears unnecessary things to make room for new information. And if you didn't get a good night's sleep, it's kind of like when you take your water bottle to school, but you haven't screwed it on as tightly. You've put so much stuff into it, you put all this liquid into it, and then it all goes to waste. It all leaks out if you don't have good rest. So above all, whether you're refreshing or rushing, whatever routine that you pick, or whichever resources you find, make sure you're getting enough rest. Okay? And so those are my 4 R's for making the most of your HSC holidays. I hope they've helped, and all the best.